Hey guys, tonight we step into a world of fire, iron and smoke. The place where muscle meets metal and sparks fly like restless stars. You wake not in your familiar bed, but on a rough straw mattress beside a forge that never truly cools. The air is thick with the tang of coal smoke and the acrid perfume of iron waiting to be shaped. Your hands, when you lift them into the glow, are already calloused, blistered and streaked with soot, as if they've known this work for years, even though your mind is still catching up to the new reality. It's dark outside, dawn barely scratching a pale line along the horizon, and the world smells faintly of wet hay and yesterday's rain. But here, inside the smithy, the air is alive with the crackle of embers and the gentle roar of a fire that seems far too eager for your attention. You rub your eyes, coughing as the smoke pricks your lungs, and realise that this is it. This is your life now. A Tudor blacksmith. You probably won't survive this, but at least you'll look heroic while you try. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it right now? I always love picturing this little community scattered across the globe. Some of you tucked under blankets in Australia, others listening at lunch breaks in Canada. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the weight of the hammer leaning against the workbench. It's not just a tool, it feels as like a declaration of your existence. You lift it and the sheer heft reminds you this is not a dainty craft. Blacksmithing in Tudor England is brutal, sweaty and punishing, and yet strangely noble. Every clang echoes into the village square like a heartbeat of the community. You shuffle closer to the forge, its glow bathing your face in warmth that's pleasant for about 3 seconds before it becomes unbearable. The bellows wheeze like an asthmatic dragon, forcing air into the coals. Each pump roars with life, sparks leaping upward to die in the gloom. Historians still argue whether Tudor blacksmiths were considered closer to craftsmen or semi-magical figures, but everyone agrees their work was indispensable. Without you, no plough could dig, no horse could travel, no gate could bar. You're basically the unsung superhero of 16th century England, minus the cape, plus a leather apron that smells like singed bacon. As you stand there, adjusting your rough wool tunic, you hear the village beginning to stir. Chickens complain in the yard outside, and somewhere a neighbour's dog decides you're already working too loudly. You grin, or at least you would, if your teeth weren't gritty with soot, and prepare to feed the fire. One mainstream fact slides in here. Tudor smithies weren't glamorous. They were dark, smoke-filled huts, often with just one door and a couple of small openings for air. Windows with glass were rare luxuries, so the flicker of the fire was your only real light. The walls are timber, blackened by years of soot, and every surface carries a film of ash. If you're the sort who likes clean countertops, well, good luck. But here's a quirkier tidbit. Villagers believe that blacksmiths could, in some mysterious way, bend not just iron but luck itself. There are old folk tales of smiths who nailed horseshoes above doorways to banish witches, or who struck iron thrice to scare away mischievous spirits. You, whether you like it or not, are part craftsman, part local sorcerer. Which is nice until someone expects you to fix their love life by hammering nails into a wooden doll. You drag the hammer's head across the anvil, its ring sharp and satisfying. The iron rod you'll work today is already waiting, half buried in the coals, glowing a dull cherry red. You grip your tongs, wrestle the stubborn thing free, and set it on the anvil. The moment your hammer falls, the sound rattles your bones. Each strike is deliberate, echoing across the village green like church bells, but far less holy and far more smoky. The rhythm is hypnotic. Strike, turn, strike, breathe. Sweat trickles down your temples. You're already filthy, and it's not even breakfast. Tudor blacksmithing is not for anyone who minds a little grime. By the way, you might want to avoid scratching your face. Coal dust and sweat together feel like medieval. And paper. You pause, letting the iron slip back into the fire, and glance at your arms. They are leaner, stronger than you remember, muscles corded like rope from years of swinging heavy tools. Even your scars tell stories. Burn marks shaped like careless fingerprints, knuckles swollen from hammer-missed moments. A modern gym membership could only dream of this efficiency. Forge Fit, the 16th century workout. Guaranteed results, but no refunds. As the iron glows again, you consider how much of your life is tied to this forge. Your bed is in the corner, just a few feet from the fire. Dangerous, yes, but practical. The smell of scorched straw is probably just another Tuesday. Meals are eaten here too. Hunks of bread, cheese, maybe a sliver of salted pork if you're lucky. Everything from your first thought at dawn to your last blink at night is tethered to this smoky heart of iron and flame. The morning creeps on. Outside, children run by, pointing and laughing, as sparks shoot out through the doorway. To them, you're part terrifying giant, part neighbourhood entertainer. Inside, your tools hang like loyal soldiers waiting for orders. The rhythm of your work takes on a meditative quality, each clang carrying you deeper into the reality of this life. The heat is overwhelming, your arms are heavy, and the sweat soaks through your tunic, but you sense something oddly calming in the repetition. The forge demands everything from you, but in return it offers a kind of purpose. Iron, once stubborn and brittle, yields under your hand. For a brief moment you feel not just like a Tudor blacksmith, but like a shaper of the world itself. And so the day begins, with smoke, sparks, and the knowledge that survival is going to be sweaty, noisy, and just a little bit magical. The morning is properly awake now, and so are you, whether you like it or not. The forge still roars, the bellows still sigh, and the faint whistle of a kettle over the hearth promises at least some hot water to wash down your breakfast. Not that breakfast is anything thrilling. A Tudor blacksmith's morning fare is usually a heel of coarse bread, maybe softened in ale, and a hunk of cheese that squeaks between your teeth. Forget bacon and eggs, that's a Sunday luxury. Most mornings you chew quickly, swallow fast, and get back to the fire before your iron grows cold. You push back your bench, brush crumbs from your apron, and return to the forge. The air is thicker now, smoky sunlight sneaking in through the gaps in the wall. You pump the bellows again, the leather creaking like tired lungs. Hot air floods into the coals, and the flames leap eagerly, painting your world orange and gold. The first order of the day is simple. Horseshoes. Always horseshoes. The villagers trust you with their animals, and for good reason. Horses are the tractors, taxis and delivery vans of Tudor England, and their shoes wear down quickly on muddy lanes and stony paths. You grip the glowing bar of iron, rest it against the anvil, and hammer until sparks fly. The sound is steady, like a drumbeat. It carries out the open door and into the village green, where folks pause to listen. To them, the ringing of your hammer is as familiar as the church bell. It means business is alive, the village is safe, and someone's horse won't go lame today. Here's a mainstream fact tucked in. Iron was everywhere in Tudor life. From nails in doors to hinges on chests, every household depended on it. And nails? Oh, you'll be making plenty. So many nails, in fact, that you sometimes wonder if your sole purpose on earth is to keep roofs from collapsing and barrels from falling apart. As the hammer strikes again, a bead of sweat runs down your temple and stings your eye. You mutter something impolite, though PG-13 enough for YouTube, and wipe it with the back of your hand. The fire shows no mercy. In fact, if the forge had a personality, it would be that one over-enthusiastic friend who thinks room temperature means lava. But here's a quirky tidbit. In some Tudor villages, blacksmiths were thought to be fireproof. People whispered that years spent by the forge made you immune to burns. Of course, you know that's nonsense. Your blistered fingers prove it. Still, it's flattering to be half imagined as a superhuman, even if you'd trade the legend for a decent pair of gloves. The morning drags on in its rhythm. Pump, strike, quench. The hiss of hot iron plunged into water is your punctuation mark. Each plume of steam a tiny exclamation. Children sometimes crowd the doorway just to watch the mist curl upward like a genie escaping a lamp. You don't shoo them away. After all, this is free entertainment in a world without TikTok. Historians still argue whether smithies doubled as community gathering spots or whether villagers kept their distance because of the noise and smoke. But judging by the gossip that drifts in through your open door, you suspect the former. Already the baker's wife has dropped in to mention that her oven hinge needs fixing. The miller has shouted about a broken cart axle, and someone muttered that the constable suspects you've been under-measuring your nails to save time. You roll your eyes. Honestly, if you wanted to cheat people, you'd have picked a career with less soot and fewer burns. By mid-morning, your arms ache and your tunic is clinging to you like damp laundry. The forge doesn't just heat your body, it seeps into your bones. You pause long enough to sip ale from a wooden cup, warm and sour but still better than water, which is generally unsafe unless boiled. It doesn't refresh you so much as blur the edge of exhaustion. That's Tudor hydration for you, slightly tipsy before noon. The horseshoe is done, rounded and ready, still glowing faintly as you plunge it into the trough. Steam billows, and the water hisses like an annoyed cat. You pull it out, black now but strong, ready to nail onto some farmer's gelding. Another small victory in a day filled with repetitive essential miracles. And just when you think you might get a moment's peace, a boy bursts through the door, barefoot, breathless, red-cheeked. "Master Smith," he cries, "the constable's mare threw her shoe." Of course she did. Animals in Tudor England have a talent for poor timing. You sigh, set aside your cup, and reach for your tools. The morning may have barely begun, but your day already feels eternal. And yet despite the sweat, the soot and the endless stream of requests, there's a strange pride in knowing the whole village leans on the strength of your fire and the sound of your hammer. The routine is relentless, but it's also comforting. You feed the forge, you feed yourself, you feed the village. Without you, the world would limp along, quite literally. With you, it strides forward, shod-nailed, hinged, and clanging with life. By now, the morning's rhythm has taken firm hold of you. The forge's pulse is your pulse, the hammer's clang is your breath. But what truly defines you as a Tudor blacksmith is not just your muscle or your fire. It's your tools. Every craft has its sacred implements, and yours hang in neat disorder along the soot-blackened wall, ready to be summoned like old comrades in arms. You pick up your hammer again, your best hammer, the one with a worn hickory handle polished by sweat and repetition. It feels balanced in your hand, not too heavy, not too light. A Goldilocks hammer for the age of iron. Some smiths prefer a heavier blow, letting sheer weight do the work. Others rely on speed and precision. You've long since discovered the truth lies somewhere between the two. On the bench beside you rests your anvil, the heart of your workshop. Anvils in Tudor England were more than lumps of iron. They were precious investments, sometimes passed down like family heirlooms. In fact, here's a mainstream historical fact. Good anvils were so valuable that when a blacksmith died, disputes often broke out over who inherited it. The apprentice, the eldest son, or a wealthy neighbour, hoping to start a forge of his own. To own an anvil was to own a future. You reach for your tongs next. They're awkward, ugly things, yet utterly essential, because gripping glowing iron with bare hands is not recommended, even in PG-13 storytelling. The tongs pinch the red-hot bar just firmly enough that you can move it without fumbling. You give them a squeeze, and the squeal of metal on metal echoes through the forge like a mouse protesting its bad luck. And then the bellows. Ah, the bellows. Your least glamorous companion. It hangs beside the forge like a tired bladder, sighing dramatically whenever you pump it. Without it, though, your fire would collapse into sulky embers. With it, the flames leap into fierce white-hot life. Historians still argue whether the bellows was operated by apprentices or by the smith himself most of the time. But either way, it's a reminder that even a blacksmith's power depends on a lung made of leather and wood. You wipe your brow and grin at the absurdity. Imagine future centuries with their electric fans and gas furnaces. You'd kill for a single button that said on. Instead, you get a workout that feels suspiciously like rowing an invisible boat to nowhere. Among your quirkier tools are the swages and fullers, little iron forms you set onto the anvil to shape more complex curves or grooves. They're the blacksmith's version of cookie cutters, though considerably less delicious. Villagers often marvel at how uniform your nails or hinges look, as if by magic, but you know it's really just the clever use of shaped iron blocks and the willingness to let your apprentice do the boring parts. Speaking of nails, it's worth pausing to appreciate their importance. A Tudor house could require thousands of them, all handmade, all hammered by smiths like you. No machines, no factories, just blistered fingers and infinite patience. There's even a fringe tidbit for you. In some places, the price of nails was so high that when buildings were abandoned, people burned them down just to salvage the nails from the ashes. Yes, you live in a world where nails are basically treasure. Imagine the dragon from The Hobbit hoarding not gold but carefully sorted bins of Tudor nails. Your workbench is cluttered with chisels for cutting, punches for piercing, hardy tools for notching. Each has its place, though, not always where you remember leaving it. Tools tend to develop personalities here. This chisel loves to roll under the bench when you're not looking. That hammer insists on denting the floor if you turn your back. The forge is not just your workspace, it's practically a cranky roommate with dozens of iron moods. You set a rod of iron on the anvil, grip your hammer, and let muscle memory take over. Strike, rotate, strike again, sparks leap like frantic fireflies. The iron changes beneath your hand, stubborn at first, but slowly, inevitably, yielding to your will. There's something meditative in this to dance with tools, your body and theirs blending into a rhythm that feels both ancient and eternal. Outside, villagers peer in as they pass. To them it looks like brute force, hammering, sweating, shouting at the fire. But you know the truth, every tool is an extension of thought. Every motion calculated, every strike a balance between strength and restraint. Too hard and you shatter. Too soft and you achieve nothing. It's as much patience as it is brawn. You take a step back, admire the glowing horseshoe now half formed, and quench it quickly with a hiss. Steam curls upward, filling the air with the sharp metallic tang that clings to your skin like a badge of honour. Somewhere outside a horse nickers, as if already aware its feet are about to feel much better. Tools, in the end, are what separate you from chaos. With them you can bend stubborn iron into shapes that hold the world together. Without them you'd be just another soot-covered villager with strong arms and nothing to show for it. You glance at your anvil once more, its scarred surface glowing faintly in the forge light, and know that as long as you keep these companions close you'll remain not just a blacksmith, but the quiet architect of Tudor life. The forge never grants you long moments of rest. By the time your tools are settled back into their familiar places, the door creaks open, and in trudge the first real customers of the day. Villagers rarely knock, they simply appear, trailing mud and chatter, and drop their needs on your already groaning workbench. Today is no different. The miller barges in first, clutching a broken iron pin that once held part of his water wheel together. Without it, the wheel is jammed, flour production has stalled, and the baker is already threatening to throw stale bread at his head. You glance at the pin, sigh, and toss it into a bin labelled urgent. Spoiler alert, everything ends up in that bin. Not 5 minutes later, the village reeve pokes his head through the doorway. He rattles off orders on behalf of the manor, hinges for a gate, nails for the steward's new barn, and a scythe blade sharpened before the next harvest. And he adds, "The constable wants that shoe on his mare today, or there'll be a fine." You rub your temples. If there's one thing you've learned, it's that in Tudor England, fines multiply faster than rabbits. The constant flow of orders shapes your day as surely as the fire shapes iron. Shoes for horses, nails for builders, locks for doors, rivets for barrels, and occasionally something stranger, like a villager who once asked you to forge an unbreakable frying pan. You tried, but the laws of physics had their say. Each request arrives with a drizzle of gossip, too. The smithy is not just a workshop, it's a newsstand with soot. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Blacksmiths were the backbone of rural economies. Every plough, spade, wagon, and weapon had its life extended by your hammer. In villages without a resident smith, people often travelled miles just to find one. You weren't merely useful, you were indispensable. And with indispensability comes odd little privileges. One quirky tidbit: some villagers believed blacksmiths could control the health of animals. Because you shaped the shoes, you were assumed to influence the horse itself. If a mare limped after shoeing, suspicion fell on you, never mind that the animal had stepped on a rock. It's flattering in a stressful sort of way to be imagined as a part farrier, part magician. As you hammer out another glowing bar into a neat square nail, you overhear more village drama, the baker grumbling about grain prices, the brewer swearing his last batch went sour because the brewer's wife looked at it wrong, and the tanner complaining about taxes. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were among the higher-ranking villagers socially, but one thing is certain: you hear every complaint, rumour, and scheme that passes through this smoke-filled hut. You're like a soot-stained confessional booth, minus the forgiveness. The afternoon begins to press in. You hammer in rhythm, ears half-tuned to the stories around you. Sparks jump like fireflies, clattering harmlessly onto the dirt floor. Children dart in and out, their eyes wide, daring each other to touch the anvil while it's still hot. You growl a warning, sending them scattering, but secretly you're amused. Your forge is their playground, your hammer their drumbeat, your fire their nightlight. The orders pile up. You stretch your back, shoulders stiff as oak beams, and wonder if the day will ever slow. But in truth, this is what you were born for, or at least what Tudor society has volunteered you for. The village needs you. Every hour, every clang, every bead of meow. Without your horseshoes, cart stall. Without your nails, roofs leak. Without your patience, half the population would be barefoot, hungry, or dangerously unhinged, literally. So you strike again. Iron bends, villagers gossip, and the forge hums with its smoky, relentless life. Your day is nothing but orders, chatter, and the satisfying rhythm of hammer against anvil, a rhythm so steady it almost feels like the heartbeat of the entire village. By midday, the forge has claimed you fully. Your arms ache, your tunic clings like it's been glued to your skin, and even your eyebrows feel slightly singed. Yet somehow you keep going because the blacksmith's body isn't a luxury, it's a requirement. To last in this trade, your muscles must grow iron hard, your lungs must tolerate smoke, and your tolerance for pain must be somewhere between high and borderline ridiculous. You pause to stretch, flexing hands that are more scar tissue than skin. Calluses rid your palms like natural armour. Every joint pops as you roll your shoulders, and you swear your spine sounds like a badly tuned lute. But still, there's a quiet pride here. Each mark, Each burn, each ache is proof you've survived another day at the anvil. In a world where plague or famine can snatch lives suddenly, at least you've got muscles that guarantee a little respect. A mainstream historical fact fits neatly here. Tudor labourers generally burn through more calories than modern athletes. Their diets, though heavy on bread, ale and occasional meat, had to fuel constant physical exertion. You swinging a hammer for 12 hours are basically an Olympic lifter with a coal dust moustache. You glance at the bucket of ale resting near the bench. Hydration, Tudor style. Sour, a bit flat but safer than water and surprisingly effective for numbing minor pain. Too effective sometimes. There are whispers about smiths who drank half their wages away, waking up with one shoe nailed backwards. You resolve not to join their ranks, at least not today. Still the body bears the cost. Your knuckles are swollen, and one nail bed is blackened from last week's missed the anvil incident. Blisters bloom and burst with predictable regularity. Quirky tidbit, some smiths actually rubbed soot into cuts to toughen the skin. Did it work? Probably not. But it made you look committed to the aesthetic, which is half the battle. The heat doesn't relent. Sweat beads down your back, stinging as it runs into half-healed burns. You wipe your brow with a sleeve that was clean sometime last week, and the smear of black you leave behind could scare children if you smiled too broadly. Outside, dogs bark, hens scatter, and the village goes on with its business. But here, inside the forge, time slows to the steady beat of hammer and breath. You consider your posture. Your legs ache from standing on the uneven dirt floor. Your shoulders carry the weight of every swing. This body is sculpted not by vanity, but by necessity. Forget Renaissance statues, your physique is functional art, forged by repetition. If Michelangelo carved David out of marble, the forge carved you out of sweat and tendon. And yet there's fragility hidden in that strength. Blacksmiths were often injured. Burns, crushed fingers, strained backs. Some never fully healed, limping through the rest of their lives. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths lived longer than average, thanks to steady food and a respected status, or shorter, thanks to injuries and inhaling coal dust. Either way, you feel every day of the trade etched into your bones. A brief pause brings small comfort. You bite into a lump of bread, chewy and rough enough to scrape the roof of your mouth, and chase it with a gulp of ale. The forge hums impatiently as if mocking your weakness. "Come on," it seems to hiss. "The iron won't hammer itself." You groan and return to your work because you know the forge is right. The afternoon sun pours through the gaps in the walls, golden beams slicing through smoke. Dust motes swirl like tiny ghosts. You catch sight of yourself reflected faintly in the water trough. A face half hidden by soot. Eyes rimmed with exhaustion, mouth twitching into a grin at the absurdity of it all. Who knew your spa day would involve cold facials and sweat therapy? Yet you wouldn't trade it. Every ache, every burn, every crooked finger is a story written on your body. A story the village reads every time they come to you for help. They know you endure the fire, so their carts roll, their gates close, their horses run, and in a strange, smoky way, that's enough. The afternoon sun tilts higher, and with it comes one of the few breaks in your routine, market day. The forge doesn't rest, of course, but neither does commerce, and you've got a cart to load. Nails, hinges, sickle blades, spare horseshoes, even the occasional iron candlestick. It all piles up in a neat jumble on the wooden cart outside your smithy. You grunt as you heave the last crate into place, shoulders straining, arms slick with sweat. The horse, already harnessed, flicks its tail impatiently, clearly unimpressed with the honour of hauling your handiwork to the square. The road is rutted. The cart squeaks like an old widow's knees, and the smell of hay mingles with the iron tang of your goods. You trudge alongside, giving the occasional slap to the reins, when the horse decides to investigate a particularly interesting patch of mud. The village green comes into view, already bustling with stalls, chatter, and a symphony of haggling voices. Market day is part trade fair, part gossip fest, and part endurance test. The butcher waves from behind his table of glistening cuts. The brewer hollers something about new ale, stronger than the last batch, and a pack of children streak past, nearly colliding with your cart. You set up near the edge of the square, where the shade of a half-dead elm tree offers the tiniest mercy. Here's a mainstream fact: Tudor markets were strictly regulated. Weights and measures had to be checked, and local officials wandered the aisles like hawks, looking for cheats. The punishment for dishonest scales could be severe, ranging from hefty fines to a stint in the stocks. You know this well, which is why you measure every nail and hinge with exaggerated care. No one wants to be the smith whose short nails get them pelted with rotten turnip. But the real trick of market day isn't just selling, it's bartering. Coins are scarce and most villagers trade goods instead. A dozen nails might fetch you a wedge of cheese, a sharpened scythe might earn you a sack of grain, and sometimes, when the brewer's wife is feeling generous, a perfectly forged horseshoe can mysteriously transform into 2 pints of ale. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, nails themselves were used almost like currency. Tiny iron coins hammered out by smiths and traded as if they held intrinsic magic. In a way, you're not just a craftsman, you're the village mint. The bustle swells around you. Shoppers haggle, chickens squawk indignantly from wicker cages, and the air smells of roasted onions and sweat. A fiddler saws away at a cheerful tune nearby, his hat out for coins, though mostly filled with crumbs and hopeful IOUs. You find yourself swept up in the rhythm of the day, part seller, part audience, part reluctant referee, when 2 men begin arguing over whose ox deserves the finer yoke. Historians still argue whether Tudor markets were more about economic survival or social glue, but standing here in the swirl of chatter and barter, you're convinced it's both. Deals are struck, friendships tested, rumours traded as readily as goods. Your forge may be the heart of the village, but the market is its restless tongue. By mid-afternoon your cart is lighter, your pouch heavier with a motley mix of coins, cheese and one oddly lopsided cabbage. You chew a strip of dried fish someone shoved into your hand as payment for sharpening a knife, and it tastes about as thrilling as chewing rope. Still you're grateful. Food is food, and the village survives by every scrap. Then comes the inevitable, the taxman. He slithers through the crowd in his fine wool coat, ink-stained fingers clutching a ledger that seems to grow thicker with every passing week. He peers at your cart, makes a note and mutters something about fair contribution. You hand over a few coins with a grimace. He walks away satisfied, while you daydream about forging a set of iron trousers for him. Extra heavy, no refunds. As the sun sinks lower, the crowd begins to thin. Farmers shuffle home with their purchases, dogs chase the last scraps, and the fiddler finally gives up, declaring the day a musical success, despite earning only half a loaf of bread. You gather your empty crates, hitch the horse again, and roll your rattling cart back toward the forge. The road is the same, the rut's just as deep, but your mood is lighter. Market day has drained you, yet in a strange way it's refreshed you too, because tomorrow, when the orders come flooding in and the hammer feels twice as heavy, you'll remember today. The noise, the laughter, the bartering, the ridiculous cabbage, and it will remind you that being a Tudor blacksmith is not only fire and sweat, it's also the rhythm of the village, the pulse of trade, and the simple stubborn joy of making sure life clanks forward, one hinge, one nail, one deal at a time. Back at the forge, the sun dipping behind the trees, you expect the day to wind down. But just as you're stacking the crates and brushing stray straw from the floor, a rider approaches. The horse is sleek, saddle well oiled, and its rider wears a doublet trimmed with embroidery finer than anything you'll ever afford. This is no farmer. This is someone from the manor, or worse, someone from the city. He dismounts with theatrical slowness, as if giving the entire village time to admire his boots. "The Lord requires a commission," he announces, ignoring your soot-blackened face. "A new lock for the manor chest, and a sword, fit for display." His tone suggests this is less a request and more a royal decree. You wipe your hands on your apron, nodding respectfully, though inside you groan. Locks and swords mean long nights and aching arms, and let's be honest, you're not likely to see half the promised payment. Still, it is not every day a blacksmith gets to forge for nobility. Mainstream historical fact: while most village smiths made horseshoes and ploughshares, some did indeed receive occasional commissions from local gentry. Decorative gates, elaborate locks, and ceremonial weapons were rare but prestigious tasks, often remembered for generations. To succeed meant not only a little coin, but also the honour of having your craft displayed in a hall of oaken tapestry. You study the rider's request. The lock must be sturdy yet elegant, the kind of object that says, "Yes, this chest is valuable, please try stealing it anyway." The sword? That's trickier. It won't be swung in battle, it's meant to glitter above the hearth, a symbol of wealth. Still, you can't slack. The Lord's pride will hang on your workmanship, and if he's unhappy, well, let's just say fines are the least of your worries. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some smiths deliberately forge small hidden flaws in noblemen's weapons. Why? So the common soldier's blade made honestly might outlast the Lord's ornament in a real fight. Was this sabotage or superstition? Hard to say. Historians still argue whether it was a rebellious tradition or just poor quality control, but you smile at the thought. Imagine a peasant's sword holding firm while a nobleman's fancy blade snaps like a biscuit. You begin preparations immediately. The forge flares as you pump the bellows, coaxing the flames to life. Sparks dance upward like fireflies gone mad. You lay the iron across the anvil, striking carefully, each clang echoing with a heavier consequence than the nails and hinges you churn out by the dozens. This work demands precision. The lock requires delicate shaping, tiny wards and teeth that must fit just so. The sword needs symmetry, a graceful curve, and a polish fine enough to see your soot-smeared reflection. Villagers gather at the doorway, whispering as they watch. For them, this is a rare spectacle. They've seen you hammer out nails 100 times, but a sword? That's something to tell their grandchildren. Children gape, wide-eyed, as you quench the blade in progress, steam swirling dramatically like a stage curtain. You can almost hear them imagining you as a hero from some ballad, the blacksmith who forges destiny with every strike. In truth, your arms are shaking, your shirt clings miserably, and you'd trade the whole experience for a nap and a pint of ale. The lock is completed first, a clever mechanism of tumblers and teeth, fitted snugly into its case. You hold it up for inspection, soot streaking your grin. It clicks shut with satisfying finality. The sword takes longer. You draw it out of the fire again and again, shaping, grinding, polishing, until its surface gleams in the fading light. It's beautiful, you'll admit, even if your back feels like it's been attacked by a team of oxen. By the time the rider returns to collect the items, your forge glows faintly in the twilight, the embers sighing like tired lungs. He tests the lock, runs a finger along the polished blade, and gives a curt nod. No smile, no thanks, just the faint jingle of a coin purse tossed onto your bench. You peek inside, half of what he promised, of course. Nobility always pay in riddles and fractions. Still, you can't help but feel a flicker of pride. Somewhere in the manor, your lock will guard treasures, and your sword will gleam beneath torchlight. You'll get no credit, of course. The Lord will boast of his fine possessions without naming the soot-stained smith who made them. But you know, and the villagers know, and that's enough to keep the forge's embers burning. The forge is quieter now, the noble's rider long gone, yet the air seems to shimmer with a different weight. Not just iron, but more meaning. You stand by the anvil wiping soot from your arms and realise that in Tudor England, iron carries more than just physical strength. It carries superstition, mystery and power. People believe in what you make not only because it works, but because it wards off the unseen. Take the horseshoe, for instance. To you, it's a lump of shaped iron nailed to a horse's hoof. To villagers, it's also a charm against witches and ill luck. Hung above a doorway, it supposedly repels the evil eye. Mainstream historical fact, the practice of nailing horseshoes above doors stretches back centuries, with Tudor folk firmly convinced that iron frightened away mischievous spirits. You chuckle as you recall the baker's wife insisting her oven wouldn't rise unless a spare horseshoe was nailed to its door. Did it work? Perhaps. Or perhaps her dough simply needed more yeast. Historians still argue whether villagers clung to these superstitions out of genuine belief or whether it was simply tradition wrapped in habit. But either way, you're the source of the talisman, which gives you a strange kind of authority. Sometimes people ask you to craft charms, a nail hammered thrice on a holy day or a piece of iron shaped like a crescent moon. These tokens, they believe, can protect children from illness or ensure a good harvest. You don't argue. If a bent nail helps someone sleep at night, who are you to deny them? And hey, it's steady business. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Tudors believed iron could cure nosebleeds. The method? Place a cold iron key on the back of the neck. Did it work? Well, maybe the patient was too distracted by the shock of the cold to keep bleeding. You've been asked more than once for a healing key, and you always oblige, though you're not sure whether the cure lies in the iron or the faith. As you pump the bellows again, you muse on your strange dual role. You're a smith, yes, but to villagers you're also a gatekeeper between the natural and the supernatural. Iron is not just metal, it's a barrier. Against rot, against rust, against things unseen. And then there's the other side of it, the unease. People trust you, but they also watch you warily. After all, you command fire, you bend the unbendable. There's power in that, and not everyone is comfortable with it. You've caught whispers now and then, mutterings about whether blacksmiths dabble in more than fire. One old man even claimed that sparks from the forge were souls being hammered. You laughed, though you admit there's something oddly poetic in the idea. You look at your tools again, the hammer catching faint firelight, the tongs resting like iron jaws, and you wonder if maybe there is something otherworldly here. Each strike transforms stubborn ore into life-shaping tools. Each nail holds roofs above heads. Each shoe carries beasts across fields. In a world filled with hunger, plague, and uncertainty, what you make is almost miraculous. The evening crowd begins to drift in, neighbours dropping by not just with orders, but with worries. A farmer asks for an iron charm to protect his newborn calf. A young woman begs you to make a nail blessed by the forge to keep nightmares from her brother. You nod, hammer, and hand over bits of iron warmed in the coals. Whether it works or not is irrelevant. The belief alone keeps spirits high. The forge crackles, its glow licking the edges of the dark. Outside, crickets begin their chorus and a chill rides the breeze. But in here the air is alive, thick with heat and something harder to name. Iron shapes more than the world's tools. It shapes the village's faith. And as long as sparks leap from your hammer, the people will believe. By the time twilight deepens, the forge feels less like a workshop and more like a stage for village life. People drift in and out, not always to order something, but to talk, argue, or lean on your anvil as if it were a tavern table. You sometimes wonder if you're more a blacksmith or an unpaid town clerk. The baker strolls by first, dusted in flour and brimming with complaints. His oven door still squeaks, and insists the hinge you fixed last month was too squeaky by half. You resist the urge to point out that maybe, just maybe, the problem is the baker slamming the door like a jealous lover. Instead, you nod, promise to check it, and get back to hammering. Not long after, the butcher arrives with his apprentice in tow, carrying a cleaver so dull it could butter bread. He grumbles about the miller's prices, mutters something about the reeve playing favourites, and finally leaves you the blade to sharpen. You wonder, not for the first time, if half your job is listening to grievances disguised as errands. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Tudor villages were webs of interdependence. The blacksmith stood at the centre, relied upon by nearly every trade. Bakers needed hinges, butchers needed knives, farmers needed ploughshares, and even clergy needed locks and candlesticks. You weren't just a tradesman, you were a hub in the wheel of daily survival. Of course, being the hub also means being caught in the spokes. Rivalries flare easily. The tanner once accused you of favouring the miller because his cart axle got repaired before the tanner's broken latch. The truth? The miller had arrived first. But gossip twisted it into evidence of a secret alliance, perhaps even a grain for iron conspiracy. Historians still argue how much Tudor village politics resembled miniature courts filled with alliances and grudges, but from your perspective, it feels like everyone is perpetually one bad hinge away from declaring war. The gossip today is particularly juicy. Word spreads that the Lord Steward has been pocketing grain, that the reeve's cousin was caught sneaking chickens, and that the brewer's ale is watered down with, brace yourself, actual water. The villagers share these whispers with the solemn urgency of state secrets, and you hammer nails in time with their tales, pretending you don't enjoy every word. A quirky tidbit. Some smiths, it said, deliberately made their forges extra smoky, so villagers hanging around would cough and leave sooner. You've considered it, but then again the gossip is free entertainment, and besides, a crowded smithy means more business. Even as neighbours chatter, you can't ignore the undercurrent of rivalry. The miller nods curtly to the butcher. The tanner scowls at the reeve's nephew. You, standing between them, become an unwilling diplomat. A misplaced word, a favour granted too soon, and suddenly half the village suspects you of favouritism. Sometimes you think the iron is easier to manage than the people. The forge roars on, steady and impartial. Sparks leap as if to punctuate every rumour, every muttered insult, every laugh. You wipe your brow, glance at the faces glowing in the firelight, and wonder how a soot-covered smith ended up at the crossroads of so many lives. By nightfall, the visitors thin out. The baker trudges home, the butcher lumbers away, and the last scraps of gossip drift into the cool night. You're left alone again, hammer in hand, ears still ringing, not just from the clang of iron, but from the clamour of human voices. You sigh, pump the bellows one last time, and remind yourself, tomorrow will bring more orders, more arguments, more whispers. In this village, iron isn't the only thing that bends under heat. People do too. And somehow you're expected to keep both from breaking. At last, a day that isn't entirely work. Market weeks, tax weeks, and endless repair weeks all blur together. But when a feast day or fair rolls around, even a Tudor blacksmith can step out of the smoke and into the crowd. You wake to the unusual silence of an idle forge. The hammer stays put, the bellows rest, and instead of glowing iron, you're greeted by the sound of fiddles and shouting outside. The village is alive with festivity. Stalls appear overnight, tables creak under the weight of roasted meats, pies and tankards of ale that slosh dangerously close to the rim. The church bells have rung, signalling both holy observance and a rare excuse to eat, drink and wrestle in public without judgment. You dust yourself off, swap your soot-crusted tunic for one only moderately stained, and head into the throng. Mainstream historical fact, Tudor feast days were numerous. Nearly a third of the calendar could be claimed by religious festivals. On these days, regular labour slowed or stopped, and the village threw itself into communal celebration. For the blacksmith, it meant a rare chance to let your hammer arm rest and your ale hand do the heavy lifting. The fairground is chaos, but in the best way. Jugglers toss clubs dangerously close to your head, a drummer pounds a beat that rattles your teeth, and children dart underfoot, sticky with honey cakes. The butcher runs a meat pie stand, the brewer is already red-faced from sampling his own ale, and the miller's wife is trying to sell ribbons while shouting at her husband for cheating at dice. You wander between them, laughing, bartering, and filling your hands with whatever food doesn't drip too quickly into your beard. A quirky tidbit: wrestling matches were often the highlight of Tudor fairs. Young men locked arms in the village square, grappling in the dirt while the crowd roared. Prizes might be as modest as a jug of ale or a belt buckle, but the honour was worth more than coin. Once, a blacksmith like you entered such a contest and accidentally knocked his opponent straight into the pig pen. You're not sure if that counts as a win, but the villagers retold it for years, so clearly it was worth the mud. The fair carries on with music and dancing. You watch the younger folk spin in circles, skirts flying, boots stamping, laughter ringing out over the fiddler's shrill bow. For a moment you feel lighter, almost forgetting the burns on your hands and the soot in your lungs. Even the reeve, usually dour as a wet log, cracks a smile as he attempts a clumsy jig. Historians still argue whether these events were primarily religious observances or thinly disguised excuses for drinking, but watching the brewer attempt to balance on a barrel while reciting psalms, you suspect it's the latter. Ale flows freely, spilling across tables, staining tunics and loosening tongues. Gossip grows louder, jokes grow bawdier, and for once, you're not just the listener at the anvil, you're part of the chorus. Someone claps you on the back, another shoves a cup into your hand, and before long you're laughing harder than you have in weeks. Soot-smudged face beaming like a lantern. Evening settles, but the fair refuses to quiet. Torches flare, shadows dance, and the fiddler seems determined to saw the strings right off his instrument. The air is thick, with roasting meat and wood smoke, a far cry from the iron tang of your forge. For tonight at least you are not the blacksmith. You're just another villager, singing, cheering, and wobbling home with a belly full of ale and a head full of nonsense. When you finally stagger back to the forge, the embers are dark, the tools asleep, and the air strangely still. Tomorrow the hammer will call you again, but tonight you've had your fill of laughter, noise, and roasted pies. And in a world where labour never seems to end, that brief pause feels like luxury itself. The morning after a fair is always a little heavier. Your head aches faintly from ale, your tunic smells suspiciously of roasted onions, and your boots are caked in mud from some field dance you only vaguely recall. Still, the forge waits, and so does the small family who shares your smoky world. You return to the workshop to find your apprentice already fumbling with the bellows. He's young, eager, and clumsy, the holy trinity of apprentices. Today he's managed to drop your favourite hammer squarely on his own toe. He hops around dramatically, while muttering curses that sound borrowed from the butcher. You bite back a laugh, reminding yourself to look stern. A smith's apprentice isn't just a helper, he's an investment, a future in training, even if at the moment he's more hazard than help. Your wife is nearby, kneading dough at the hearth, keeping an eye on both the forge and the children. The little ones scamper in and out, chasing each other with wooden spoons, their giggles rising above the hiss of quenching iron. This is the backdrop of your work, family life folded into the clang of the anvil. Mainstream historical fact, in Tudor England, many trades were family businesses. Wives and children often worked alongside the craftsmen, whether by stoking fires, running errands, or simply keeping the household together under the same smoky roof. Apprentices, meanwhile, might live with the master smith for years, becoming part of the family in everything but blood. Of course, family and apprentices also bring their own chaos. Your eldest son insists on helping by swinging a hammer that's clearly too big for him. Your daughter wants to paint horseshoes with flowers, and your apprentice, bless him, quench cools a red-hot rod too soon, cracking it, then insists the water was haunted. You sigh, counting to 10, and remind yourself patience is also a craft. Here's a quirky tidbit. Apprentices were sometimes punished not by beatings, but by being sent to fetch a bucket of sparks, or a left-handed hammer. You've considered it more than once. Watching your apprentice chase imaginary sparks through the yard would almost be worth the delay in work. The forge roars on, a family chorus. Your wife calls you to taste the bread, your children argue over whose turn it is to pump the bellows, and your apprentice winces as he finally manages to hold the tongs without dropping the iron into the ash. You hammer, you correct, you laugh despite yourself. Historians still argue whether smithing families were better off than ordinary peasants. You do have steady work, food on the table, and a roof over your heads, but you also live with the constant risk of fire, accidents, and the slow grind of exhaustion. Prosperity and peril side by side like twin sparks on the anvil. Still, in the quiet moments, when your child hands you a cup of ale with both hands, or your wife hums softly while folding dough, you feel a warmth that even the forge can't rival. This life is hard, yes, but it is also shared, and somehow the laughter and mistakes make the soot on your arms feel a little lighter. The hammer falls again. Huh? The family shuffles around you. Oh. And you realise that even in this relentless smoky trade you're not alone. Every clang carries not just the shape of iron, but the shape of family, welded together by fire, sweat, and the odd flying hammer. By now you've grown used to the layers of soot that cling to everything you own. Clothes, after all, tell the world who you are, and in your case they shout, "This person lives inside a chimney!" You glance down at yourself, a woolen tunic permanently streaked with black, sleeves frayed where sparks have chewed the edges, and a leather apron thick enough to stand upright on its own. That apron is your shield. Cracked, stiff and scorched, it carries more scars than you do. Each burn mark is a diary entry written in fire. Without it, your chest would look like the cook's spit-roasted goose. Still, the apron doesn't protect everything. Your arms bear freckles of old burns, and your shins have dents from wayward hammers. A modern safety inspector would faint at the sight of you, then sue the forge for emotional damages. Mainstream historical fact. Tudor clothing reflected both function and social rank. As a blacksmith, you wear coarse wool or linen for daily work, with your leather apron over it. No silk, no lace, no frills. Those belong to the nobility. At church or feast days, you might put on your Sunday best, which is essentially the same tunic washed once in a blue moon. Your apprentice, meanwhile, wears an even simpler outfit, thin wool patched at the elbows, and a cap that slips over his eyes whenever he bends to pick up tongs. He insists the cap makes him look professional. You point out it mostly makes him look blind. Your wife's garments tell another story. A kirtle of plain-dyed wool, an apron for the constant chores, and a linen coif over her hair to keep the soot at bay. Though plain, her clothes are always tidy, a small act of defiance against the grime that dominates your trade. She reminds you that presentation matters, even if you spend your days looking like a smudge come to life. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed smiths' clothes held protective power. A scrap of a blacksmith's apron, tied to a charm, was thought to guard against evil. Imagine that, your sweat-soaked, coal-stained rags seen as holy relics. You're not sure whether to laugh or start selling apron clippings by the yard. Of course, clothing's also social currency. When you step into the market, your soot-stained tunic places you firmly into the middle ranks, not as poor as a beggar, not as fine as a merchant. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths belonged among the respectable craftsmen, or were lumped in with the grubbier labourers. From your perspective, people nod to you politely, but they don't invite you to sit at the Lord's table. unless of course something breaks. Then suddenly you're the most fashionable man in town. You glance at your children playing in the yard. Their clothes, though patched, are colourful in spots, reds and blues faded but cheerful. Children's garments are simpler versions of adult wear, though looser and easier to replace once they inevitably tear them climbing fences. Your daughter has tied a ribbon in her hair, proudly declaring she looks like a lady. You smile, soot streaking your teeth, and resist pointing out that ladies generally don't wrestle pigs in ribbons. The forge hisses, the fire spits, and you tug at your apron again. It's heavy, hot, and cumbersome, yet you'd feel naked without it. Clothes may not make the man, but in Tudor England they certainly mark the man. And for you the marks are black, brown, and a little bit singed. The week grinds on, and soon it is Sunday, the one day when the forge goes quiet, the hammer rests, and the village shifts its gaze from iron to heaven. You rise early still, because old habits die hard, but instead of stoking the fire, you scrub your hands as best you can, scrape soot from under your nails, and tug on your least filthy tunic. Your wife and children do the same, and together you walk across the green toward the stone church whose bell has been tolling since dawn. Inside, the air is cool and smells faintly of damp stone and beeswax. Light filters through small panes of coloured glass, painting faint jewel tones onto the flagstones. You slide into a pew, the wooden bench polished smooth by countless parishioners' backsides. Around you neighbours settle in. The baker with flour still clinging to his cuffs, the miller whispering too loudly to his wife, the reeve already nodding off. You fold your soot-stained hands and try to look penitent, though your mind drifts back to whether you quenched that half-finished horseshoe yesterday. Mainstream historical fact, church attendance was compulsory in Tudor England. Missing service without good reason could result in fines, so even if you're bone-tired or your forge is piled with orders, you're here. Everyone is. It's not just about faith, it's about being seen, proving you belong, and keeping the reeve from scribbling your name into his fine book. The priest speaks of sin, of duty, of obedience to both God and King. You listen, nodding at the right places, but part of you can't help cataloguing your own blacksmith sins. Did you overcharge the tanner for nails? Did you shout at your apprentice a little too fiercely? Did you tell the brewer his ale tasted like swamp water? Okay, that last one was true, but still. You shift uncomfortably, wondering if soot counts as a stain on the soul as well as the tunic. Historians still argue how much religion shaped daily Tudor life versus how much was simply ritual. To you it feels like both. Faith is a rhythm as steady as the anvil's ring, woven into feast days, prayers before meals, and charms villagers ask you to hammer on holy days for extra luck. Even your forge in its way feels like a chapel of fire. You bend metal as the priest bends words, each shaping something stubborn into something useful. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believe that blacksmiths had a special relationship with saints, particularly St. Clement, patron of metalworkers. On his feast day, smiths sometimes paraded through villages carrying hammers as like holy relics. You imagine your apprentice trying that. He'd probably drop the hammer on his foot again and declare it divine punishment. After the service, villagers linger in the churchyard, chatting and eyeing one another's clothing. This is the Tudor runway, where everyone inspects hems, caps and shoes. Your tunic, still carrying faint streaks of soot despite your scrubbing, earns a few smirks. You shrug. Everyone knows the forge never truly washes off. And besides, tomorrow they'll all need your nails again, regardless of how clean your cuffs look. Walking home, the bells fading behind you, you feel strangely refreshed. The forge will demand your sweat again soon, but for one morning you've stepped out of the smoke into something quieter. Faith, ritual, and maybe just a little forgiveness cling to you like a second apron, lighter, cleaner, and blessedly free of sparks. The week creeps forward. And with it come reminders that the forge is as dangerous as it is necessary. Fires, fines and accidents hover like vultures, waiting for a slip of your hammer or a stray ember to bring ruin. You've lived with these risks so long they feel almost ordinary, like neighbours you don't like but can't avoid. The forge itself is a menace. Sparks leap unpredictably, sometimes finding their way into your hair, your sleeve, or the dry straw near the hearth. You remember last summer, when a careless apprentice left the bellows pumping too long. The fire roared so hot it cracked the anvil's edge and scorched half the workbench. You spent the night dousing flames with buckets of water, praying the entire smithy wouldn't collapse. Mainstream historical fact, fire was one of the constant terrors of Tudor villages. Thatched roofs, timber walls and open flames made even small sparks potentially catastrophic. Smithies, with their hungry forges, were seen as both essential and perilous. And then there are the accidents. Your arms bear scars from burns, your shins from dropped tools. Just last week your apprentice caught the edge of a glowing rod against his forearm. He yelped, you scolded, and your wife smeared the wound with goose fat, the village's all-purpose cure. Historians still argue whether remedies like that actually worked, or whether they were more wishful thinking than medicine. Either way, your apprentice now has a pink stripe across his arm that he claims makes him look battle-hardened. You call it clumsy. The fines, though, sting more than burns. If your weights are questioned at market, if a horseshoe cracks too soon, if a noble decides your lock isn't ornate enough, you're the one who pays. The reeve has no trouble scribbling penalties into his ledger, and coins seem to leak from your pouch faster than sweat leaks from your brow. You once joked that the true hammer striking you wasn't iron, but taxes. The reeve didn't laugh. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some places, blacksmiths accused of shoddy work had to perform public ordeals to prove their honesty, plunging their hands into boiling water or carrying red-hot iron a few paces to show divine favour. Imagine that. You burn yourself for free, and people cheer, as if your daily blisters aren't enough proof of devotion. Even beyond the forge, dangers lurk. Disputes with neighbours can turn ugly. You recall the time a farmer blamed you for his horse's limp, insisting you'd nailed the shoe wrong. The truth? The animal had a stone bruise. Still, he shouted in your doorway until half the village gathered, watching to see if you'd cave or fight. You chose patience, barely. But you know your reputation is as fragile as glass. One whisper of dishonesty and the gossip would spread faster than fire in a thatched roof. And yet you keep hammering. Each clang on the anvil is a small defiance against the threats waiting to topple you. The forge is dangerous, yes, but it is also your anchor. Without it, you'd be another hungry villager with empty hands. With it, you shape not only iron, but your own survival. By evening, you sit at the doorway, watching the embers glow faintly in the twilight. The smoke curls lazily upward, harmless now, a reminder that even fire can be tamed, most of the time. You breathe deep, scars aching, purse a little lighter than yesterday, but still here, still standing, still shaping a world that never stops testing the strength of your hands. The forge hums low tonight, its roar softened to a gentle purr. The last horseshoe hangs cooling on the peg, the anvil's ring has faded into silence, and even your apprentice has finally managed to stop tripping over his own feet. The day is done. You step back, shoulders heavy, and listen to the world settling around you. Crickets chirp in the grass, a dog barks somewhere down the lane. The smell of smoke lingers, mingled with damp earth from the evening dew. You ease onto a stool by the doorway, stretching legs that feel as though they've been hammered as much as the iron. The children drift in, yawning, their faces smudged but smiling. Your wife sets down a wooden bowl of pottage, thick with beans and cabbage. You scoop it up with coarse bread, chewing slowly, tasting every grain of salt and ash that clings to the meal. Nothing fancy, just fuel for tomorrow's hammer blows. Mainstream historical fact. Most Tudor villagers ate simply, with bread, pottage and ale as staples. Meat was rare, usually reserved for feast days or special occasions. Tonight's stew is plain but nourishing, and you know it will give you strength for another day at the forge. As the children curl by the hearth, your wife hums a tune older than you can trace. The melody mingles with the crackle of cooling embers, weaving something soft into the soot-stained air. For a moment, the smithy feels less like a place of labour and more like a home. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed a forge should never go completely cold, for fear it might invite misfortune. So you keep one ember alive, tucked under ash, glowing faintly like a tiny heartbeat. Tomorrow it will flare again, and so will you. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were more respected for their craft or feared for their connection to fire. But as you sit in the twilight, you realise it doesn't matter. The forge is both your burden and your blessing, your prison and your pride. You are soot-streaked, scarred, half-deaf from hammer blows, but you are also indispensable. Without you, the village limps. With you, it moves forward, steady as iron. The embers fade slowly, like stars dimming at dawn. You lean back, eyelids heavy, soot still etched into your skin. The forge has claimed you, shaped you, and will rise with you again tomorrow. For now, though, you let the world quiet, surrendering to the stillness that comes only when iron finally rests. And now, with the hammer silent and the fire soft, let the story ease itself into a whisper. The forge, once blazing with sparks and sweat, glows gently, its warmth no longer demanding, only comforting. You picture the embers as tiny stars in a private night sky, steady, familiar and kind. The village is quiet. The gossip has faded into sleep, the animals tucked into stalls, the fair long forgotten. Even the Reeves ledger is closed for now, resting in the dark. You sit with your back against the timber wall, soot still clinging faintly to your hands, but your muscles finally allowed to loosen. The air smells of wood smoke and bread cooling on the hearth, simple scents that belong to safety. In this stillness, you realise how much has been asked of you, and how much you've given. Iron bent, nails hammered, gates hung, horses shod. The world held together not by glory or fame, but by small steady acts of craft. You are tired, yes, but it is the good kind of tired, the kind that promises rest has been earned. So let your breath slow, let your shoulders sink. Imagine the weight of the hammer slipping from your hand, the apron folded neatly aside, the soot washing away like shadows at dawn. The fire fades, and with it the noise of the day. You close your eyes. The forge will wait. The work will wait. For now there is only stillness, only quiet, only the gentle rhythm of your own breath carrying you into sleep.